بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. I'm going to start in a possibly unexpected place by looking at one of the founders of the French feminist movement at the turn of the last century, an individual by the name of Valentine de Saint-Point, 1875 to 1953. There's a new biography, incidentally, if you want the details of her life, by Véronique de la Fuente. The life is, as one would expect, well documented, except for reasons which I'll shortly explain, the closing years of her life. She's from a distinguished family. Her great uncle is the philosopher Lamartine, who she regards as a kind of inspiration for the remainder of her life. She goes to Paris from her native Masson and immediately throws herself into the Belle Époque world of wine, women, men, and song. Very much regarded as an Amazon, bacchante, as she was referred to, somebody who was a party girl, but a party girl with a mission. Liberated, flagrant, experimenting with everything that was available. One of the muses and also one of the mistresses of Rodin, a friend of Apollinaire and a number of avant-garde poets at the time, a typical French avant-garde intellectual. So far so predictable. She's a society beauty, she's from a good family, but certainly the thing she's not interested in is anything like organized religion. In fact, in keeping with many of her French Republican generation, she was more or less phobic towards it. But this is a time of transition in France. Of tremendous excitement and anticipation. In 1900, we have the Exposition Universelle, which is a kind of great flamboyant French gesture towards the March of Progress, and in it, in Paris, there is a Salle de la Femme, a hall of women, in which visitors could see the latest ideas about the status of women and the due relation between the genders. And it was an interesting kind of clash between two centuries. On the one hand, there was certainly the sense amongst many people, probably most at the time, and by no means just religionists, that the appropriate place for the woman was dutiful submission at home. But this was also the beginning of the French suffragette movement. Many French women were campaigning for the vote and beyond. French women were just starting to be elected to the French Parliament. And so one also detects in that pavilion a sense that something is about to change and that an unimaginable transformation in society is breathlessly waiting to happen. Valentine is very much on the side of progress. And in the course of the next couple of decades, she traces a career for herself as a poet. She publishes several volumes of poetry, as a dancer, and as a choreographer, as an artist, particularly known for her woodcuts, and also as one of France's first feminist thinkers. But her feminism is of an unusual kind. This is before feminism even begins to be a coherent movement with its own styles of interpretation, its own standard text, its own list of legitimate agendas and aspirations. Everything is being remade in the white-hot furnace of France's new secular modernity. She's a member of the Futurist movement. The Futurists are those who are iconoclastically committed to burning the libraries, destroying the works of art in the Louvre, getting rid of the old, stale, bourgeois academicism, and moving towards a new future. Some of them are inclined towards Bolshevism, others more patriotic and looking for forms of maintaining a specifically national or even racial narrative in the new, brave, scientific dawn. She's very much at the vanguard of that movement, and the most significant futurist thinker who is also involved actively with women's issues. Some of the futurists believe that the nature of woman, as defined by science, has to be primarily reproductive. There was a strong Darwinian sense that the nature of woman is to maximize the perpetuation of what the professor for the popular understanding of science not a million miles from here would regard as the selfish gene. We are just biology. This is about survival through war, through sexuality, through establishing the survival of the fittest. It's quite Nietzschean, but of course the Marxists are also thinking along broadly similar lines. And for those futurists, the role of the woman was necessarily what it had always been, was a subordinate one, auxiliary, the helpmeet. So F.T. Marinetti, who's one of the leaders of the futurist movement, writes a manifesto, the founding manifesto of futurism. This is what he says. We will glorify war, the world's only hygiene, militarism, patriotism, the destructive gesture of freedom bringers, beautiful ideas worth dying for, and scorn for woman. Valentine de Saint-Point objects to this, and she writes her own counter-manifesto, the Manifesto of Futurist Women, which is to this day revered by people like Luce Irigaray and other French feminists as one of the key iconic documents of the founding age of French feminism. And this is the kind of thing she says. I'll just translate a few selected highlights. The second periods when the most heroes and geniuses come forth from the terrain of culture in all its ebullience are rich in masculinity and femininity. Those periods that had only wars with few representative heroes because the epic breath flattened them out were exclusively virile periods. Those that denied the heroic instinct and turning towards the past annihilated themselves in dreams of peace were periods in which femininity was dominant. We are living at the end of one of these periods. What is most lacking in women, as in men, is virility. That is why futurism, even with all its exaggerations, is right. So she starts by apparently supporting Marinetti's thesis. She says history is not so much about men and women, it's about two eternal principles, masculinity and femininity, which, as most people at the time thought, were actually scientifically established essences. Now, what do they do? What is the natural function of the genders? The spiritual inspirer, woman, the carnal inspirer, immolates or takes care, causes blood to run or staunches it, is a warrior or a nurse. It's the same woman who, in the same period, according to the ambient ideas grouped around the day's event, lies down on the tracks to keep the soldiers from leaving for the war, or then rushes to embrace the victorious champion. That is why no revolution should be without her. That is why, instead of scorning her, we should address her. She is the most fruitful conquest of all, the most enthusiastic, who, in her turn, will increase our followers. But not feminism. Feminism is a political error. Feminism is a cerebral error of woman, an error that her instinct will recognize. We must not give woman any of the rights claimed by feminists. To grant them to her would bring about not any of the disorders the futurists desire, but on the contrary, an excess of order. And that's where she really takes, from the perspective of present-day feminism, an essentialist wrong turn. She is insistent that, at least through the feminine principle, womanhood is essential to the revolutionary order, that whenever there is greatness in human history, there must be the nurturing principle of womanhood as well as the assertive, dominant principle of virility. So she scorns Marinetti's more or less Taliban-like erasure of women and the female principle. But what she's not saying is that this is going to be about rights and about an equating of the sexes. Throughout her career, she argues very strongly against that. For her, that would be to subordinate women to a set of priorities that have been established by men according to a particular virile sense of what human fulfillment should constitute. She's looking for a liberation. She's certainly anti-bourgeois. She's revolutionary. She's against the established order. She's sexually liberated. She's exploring all of the new arts that are iconoclastically throwing down for idols of the past. But she's doing it in the name of what she takes to be a female, feminine essence, which is what she wants to liberate, which has nothing to do with simply becoming replicas of the man. A year later, she publishes another manifesto. It's basically these two documents that she's remembered for, and if you Google her up on the internet, this is what will come up more frequently than her poems or her art. 1913, Manifeste de la Luxure, the Futurist Manifesto